What's up, YouTube? It's time to introduce a new segment on this channel, which it's been a long time coming, and it's not exactly a revolutionary concept, but it's one of the most fun and challenging things to do as a music fan, and that's the discography ranking, where you go through a band's entire catalog and rank the albums from worst to best. I should clarify that discography rankings by nature are such temporary opinions sometimes, because we all have those bands where it seems like every few months you're going through a different phase in terms of gravitating towards certain parts of their catalog or certain eras. So when you do one of these, a lot of it depends on just where you're at the time, which is why I chose a band for my first one that I've been listening to since middle school, that I know like the back of my hand, and that I've already spent countless hours forming opinions on, and that band is Machine Head. Machine Head's also such a fun choice for this segment because they have such a dramatic career arc. Like, they're not one of these bands like Suffocation that's just been pumping out the same record. If you look at their 20 years of music, it couldn't be more fucking different. When they came out in 1994 with Burn My Eyes, their first record, they're positioned as the saviors of metal. They play this very interesting fusion of groove metal and thrash metal, and people really latch on tightly because it is the mid-90s and things are kind of bleak for metal. And then by the end of the decade, they're essentially playing nu metal, and they alienated a lot of metalheads in the process. So then 2002, they get dropped from Roadrunner Records completely and almost break up, which if you want the full sob story, watch the Elegies DVD. It's really inspiring stuff for anyone who's ever been down on their luck. Machine Head has too, and it's a very inspiring thing. So the band almost implode, but then they come roaring back in the second half of their discography and become like one of modern metal's biggest redemption stories. So it's just a very interesting arc that this band has had. So Machine Head's catalog is fascinating to discuss because they've wowed people, they've polarized people, they've switched up their sound like crazy, and all that makes for fun debate. So let's get into it. 8 albums spanning 2 decades. Let's fucking do it. Unfortunately, we gotta get the worst album out of the way here, and that would be without question 2001's Supercharger, the band's 4th record. When you think about it, this is the album that Machine Head almost ended over. And you can hear why. It really does sound so forced and so uninspired. This record is the follow-up to 1999's The Burning Red, which was the band's drastic shift into commercial nu metal that initially pissed everybody off. But Supercharger really is what everybody accuses The Burning Red of. Supercharger really is Machine Head just nosediving creatively into the depths of the worst of turn-of-the-century nu metal and trying so hard to cross over, but instead just making fucking cringe-inducing music. Now, the whole dumbed-down, drowning pool, spine shank sound of this album doesn't really take a genius to figure out, so I won't really get into that, but I do want to talk a bit about the awful lyrics. I do need to shine a bit of a light on those. How about on the song White Knuckle Blackout, where Rob Flynn says, and he really says this, "Adrenaline is the lubrication focusing my mind." Or how about the entirety of the song American High, which I still to this day I can't believe that these lyrics exist on a Machine Head song, especially when you have the context of what their entire rest of their catalog sounds like. I guess I'll just say that these lyrics, by comparison, make like Plain White Tees and All Time Low lyrics look like E comics. It's something else. I mean, the track Bulldozer has remained a live favorite over the years, and I guess some people still think that the single Crashing Around You is catchy, but unfortunately this is an album to just avoid at all costs. I like to pretend that it doesn't exist. At number 7 is the band's 1997 sophomore record, The More Things Change. A slightly controversial pick, I realize, but I stand by it. So, after Burn My Eyes, which was not only one of the best mainstream metal records of the 90s, but is also in the conversation for best metal debuts, period. After that record, The More Things Change is the definition of a sophomore slump. Instead of the visceral attack of Burn My Eyes, The More Things Change has more of like a monotonous aggression with very little going on riff-wise. And I don't care what people say, that includes 10 Ton Hammer and Take My Scars, which to this day are fan favorites and live favorites, but I'm sorry, but Take My Scars is boring. And frontman Rob Flynn spends the entire record trying way too hard to sound like Phil Anselmo from Pantera, which contextually is totally understandable. In the mid-90s, Pantera were it. They were practically the only game in town when it came to truly uncompromising metal getting any sort of mainstream attention. But yeah, with the more things change, I'd actually prefer hearing Machine Head try the new metal thing or try something different rather than spend their time in this half-assed purgatory like they are on this record. Which brings me to number 6, 1999's infamous Burning Red, which saw Machine Head abandon their thrash metal, groove metal hybrid and dabble in the new metal world a bit and completely lose their edge. Or at least that's what people would like you to believe. The reality is a bit different. The reality is that this is still a fucking heavy record. The reality is that if this is new metal, then Machine Head were playing a way heavier, way more advanced version of it than anybody else. I love the dissonant riffing on the song Nothing Left, or the simple drone of Exhale the Vial, which the simple 3-4 chord grooves work on this record because they're part of the MO, which is just a stripped down assault. Sure, you could mock the rapping on From This Day, or you could scoff at their Police cover, and you'd be within your right. But I really disagree with how people frame this album. People frame this album as Machine Head going soft. But the truth is that it's still heavy. It just conforms to trends. It's basically Machine Head doing trends on their terms. And the follow-up, Supercharger, would be Machine Head actually losing their identity. So I hope people understand the difference, because I really enjoy this record, and I'll defend it up to a point. At number 5, we have 2003's Through the Ashes of Empires, the triumphant return to form after Supercharger that many cite as one of the band's best. I am not one of them, and here's why. This is a transitional record. This is a record on which the band were very much having some major creative breakthroughs, but were still finding their footing, if you ask me. Songs like In the Presence of My Enemies and, of course, Imperium are fucking slamming. Don't get me wrong, but there's still some dull riffing on Elegy and Days Turn Blue to Gray, which are two songs I don't like at all. There's some pretty spotty singing from Rob Flynn on Left Unfinished. And there's Dave McLean's kick drum sound, which is just way too clicky for me. And there's the fact that the band recorded a bonus track afterwards, Seasons Wither, that they added into the track list because it was so obvious that this track, which was the direction they would eventually go, was so much better than what was on the record. So Ashes actually isn't one of my favorites. And I understand that if you were born between like 1987 and 1991, that it might have been like a major coming of age record for you, and I totally get that. But for me, it's like the first Marilyn Manson record. I like it, but knowing the 3 records that Manson was about to make keeps me from coming back to that first record. And the same principle applies here. So from here, it starts to get pretty fucking difficult. But kicking off the second half at number 4 is the band's most recent release, 2014's Bloodstone Diamonds, a fantastic album that saw the band continue to push themselves and continue to experiment and just put everything they had into making every track an individual personality. You have straightforward thrashers like Killers and Kings, which is, in a nutshell, what we've come to expect from Machine Head in the past decade. But then you have ambitious moments too, like the ominous build of Sail Into the Black, or the string sections on Now We Die. Each song really stands on its own. Unfortunately, to me, they could have chopped off a couple songs from this 70-minute record. I respect the ultra down-tune experiment of Beneath the Silt, but it just fell a bit short for me, as did the song Game Over, which just has this over-the-top agita that gets a bit tiresome. And since you have both Damage Inside and Imaginal Cells sort of breaking traditional song form, they probably just should have picked one of those 2 songs, because it kind of weighs down the back end of the track list. But Night of Long Knives and In Comes the Flood are just 2 of Machine Head's greatest moments, periods. Oh my god. Both choruses just... I cannot recommend these 2 songs enough. This next choice was the brutal one, but coming in at number 3 is the band's debut, Burn My Eyes, which has a raw, groovy heaviness with few equals. Not to mention having one of the most punishing guitar tones I have ever heard. This record is just a rager all the way through. It just makes me want to break everything in my path, and for the entirety of the record, which that's perhaps its biggest feat is somehow managing to avoid feeling front-loaded when the opening 1-2 punch is Davidian and old. That is a miracle. This is a quintessential record for 90s metal, and while it's technically not Machine Head's best album, it's definitely the most important one that they've released and ever will release. I will mention that one thing that people seem to kind of dance around when they're sucking this album off is that Rob Flynn's vocals aren't entirely there yet, and that would be a problem on More Things Change especially. But with the style they play on Burn My Eyes, it's hardly a deal breaker. I just figured I'd mention it. Getting the silver medal at number 2, we have 2011's Unto the Locust, which is the album that showcases the band at the indulgent height of their experimentation, which is what makes it so great. I will repeat my praise for Bloodstone and Diamonds tenfold when I say that each individual track on here, and there are only 7 of them, stands completely separate. There's classical guitar on a couple tracks, there's a children's choir on Who We Are, there's strings, there's creative vocal layering, and amongst all these bells and whistles, right smack dab in the middle is the same heavy fucking grooves that we come to Machine Head for. Just notice the undeniable maturity of this record in comparison with Burn My Eyes, and you might start to understand why I made the unconventional choice to pick this album ahead of that one. The band just sounds so self-assured and so confident even when they're trying all these things. The ballad in the middle, Darkness Within, is just mind-blowing. It might be my favorite Machine Head song ever. It's essentially just this elegant love letter to music and how it helps us through hard times, and it moves me just as much now as it did in the fall of 2011 when it came out. My criticisms of this record are very minor. You have the song This Is the End, which has some almost like black metal style tremolo picking and like a half blast beat, and that really annoys me because I think that song would have been sick if they just went for like a full blast beat there. So there's that. And then on Who We Are, the children's choir is a cool experiment, but there's no getting around how discordant it sounds, so I deduct some points there. But otherwise, this is modern metal at its finest. And speaking of modern metal at its finest, the number 1 slot goes, not surprisingly, to 2007's The Blackening. It's been called a masterpiece, it's been called the album of the century, it's been called the master of puppets of this era, the accolades go on and on and on. But all I want to add is that this is where the band's sense of melody caught up with the hammering brutality that had always been there. And the result is you get the best of everything. You get an album with incredible depth. The politically charged lyrics, the winding but completely cohesive song structures, the counterbalance between soaring melodies and punishing breakdowns, the intricate musicianship, which was one of the biggest strides that they made on here. It's all there. It's one of my favorite metal albums of all time, and I'll be sure to celebrate its 10th anniversary in a couple weeks, which is pretty crazy to think about. Its appeal has not waned in the slightest in that decade. It is Machine Head's magnum opus. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of Machine Head's discography. It was a ton of fun for me to spend the last week or so just revisiting all these records and waffling back and forth to determine my final ranking, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing more of these. So if there's any specific artists whose discography you'd love to see me dive into, just let me know. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, or shoot me a message so we can continue to talk music, and I'll see you guys soon.